Are you a writer? Neither am I. However, there are stories that I want to tell, and I'm sure that there's stories that you want to tell too. But if we're both not able to write, how do we figure out our characters and their place in our worlds? Well, there is no universal answer for that question because it is incredibly broad. However, I feel like I found a way to approach them in a way that does not require a lot of writing down and works more so with a visual medium. However, before I start, hello everyone. Welcome back to my atelier. I hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to go over how I use my sketchbook and drawings to create characters and fit them into my settings, as well figure out how to get along with my other characters. Now, ideas don't just come out of nowhere. They always have to be rooted in something. May that be a position you have to fill in your world, a general idea you have, a piece of dialogue, or maybe just a piece of clothing. As long as you have something to root your character in, you're basically good to go. Or good to start. In my case, I knew that I had a position to fill in my world. I have a cast of librarians that work at my witch school's magical library, and while I find their dynamic really fun to work with, it's not particularly interesting. So I've been thinking a lot about how I can make their dynamic more interesting, not just between each other, but also in the context of my setting. And the way that I kind of quote unquote solve this is by, maybe bringing in an outside character. I think having characters get along, but having their organizations not get along, or at least be suspicious of each other, is something very interesting because you kind of have to contrast like duty and personal life. So that's kind of my route that I chose. I also knew that I wanted my character to be a girl because I only have one girl in my library cast, and well, I have a girl and I have a war criminal and I have an owl. But I really like her. You might have seen her on my channel before. Her name's Eloise. She's a candle witch and she's a bit on the funny side. So I was like, having a very serious character to kind of contrast that might be very fun to kind of play around with. And at that time of drawing, so the footage you see me drawing is, I haven't really realized that yet, but you can see how subconsciously I keep coming back to more edgier shapes. And that's also another thing I kind of want to touch upon. A lot of times we already know more about the characters we're about to create than what we think we actually know. We're very good at puzzle solving, so this initial page is really just for kind of loosely sketching and not thinking about it too much, because that's how I feel a lot of the good ideas come by. I just draw what I think fits, and if it's good, it's good. If it's not good, I have a lot of pages left in my sketchbook, and I think that's the best idea to kind of approach it. Just fill a page with a bunch of ideas. They don't have to be good, and you know what, they might actually be good, but they might just not fit the character that you're creating right now. And good news, no one's the recycling police here, so you can just keep it for another time. A lot of times, and I've realized that when I was talking to a few people in my Discord too, it's like a lot of people feel as though the process and the ideation that they do for one character is only for that character, and they can't really reuse it because it belongs to another character. And I think that you're losing out a lot of very fun ideas if you kind of see it like that. Sketchbook should not be a linear process of your work. It should be your visual library. It should be something you can come back to and reflect on your ideas and maybe use for something new. I still reference sketchbooks from when I was 14. I keep them all. Stylistically they might not be the best thing, but some ideas were good, and I keep them because it's fun. So if you struggle with something, either A, get all your ideas on one page, or alternatively, check your old sketchbooks. There's always something good in there. Trust me, even if it's stylistically or on a skill level not that good. Now, after some of my kind of experimentation, I went in with some inks. I always try to keep my pencil quite loose when I sketch because I'm not a good inker.
And I find that if I agonize over my technique in the ideation process, I end up focusing on my technique way too much and nothing good comes from it. So, when you're ideating, don't pressure yourself to create a quote-unquote masterpiece. Your sketchbook, it's fun to show your sketchbook to other people, but ultimately you shouldn't treat your sketchbook as something that you present to someone. One thing that I did find myself coming back to a lot is very symmetrical shapes, especially in terms of hair and just glasses, eyes, everything. I went with something very symmetrical because it fits a serious character. It's very neat. And while I did want this character to be serious, I didn't want her to be too serious, and I'm gonna get in on that later because I already kind of started to get an idea of who this character is in the ideation stage. I did really like the idea of a dragon or a fawn. I already have a dragon folk in my library staff, so I went with a fawn instead. And that's something that I started thinking about a lot, because fawns would probably live longer than humans, and they would probably be a long-living species, right? So I thought it would be quite interesting to have such a long-living species be in a human environment. And that might not apply to all of world building, but for fantasy it does. I think there's a lot of very interesting themes that can be explored with long-living species, because they might age differently, they might have different customs, they might seem time differently, and that can lead to a lot of conflict, not just between characters but also internal. And I like the idea of this character being someone who in human years is maybe 200 years old, but in fawn age is still quite young. So you would have kind of the knowledge of a long lifespan contrasted with this kind of childish, not innocence, but these childish needs. I think when we're young, it's very important to socialize and stuff, because development or whatsoever. And when you don't get that, or when you are isolated from people, that's gonna have effects on you. And this isolation or alienation is something that I kept thinking about while I was drawing her, and it ended up becoming a central theme. And I don't think, to be honest, that I would have had these thoughts if I agonized over my technique so much. So really, keep it loose, guys. On the second page, or the second half of the first page, I took the elements that I really liked about my loose sketches and tried combining them into one. I really liked that kind of scholar's hat. I was debating if I wanted to give her a witch hat, because obviously she's at a witch school, but I thought that giving her a different hat that kind of indicates her as a member of a different organization could kind of help, contribute to that alienation and contribute to that difference, and the fact that she is, from a different organization. And that's also kind of what I took into when I was thinking about her clothes, something more uniform in a literal sense. It was also around that time when I started thinking about what organization she would be part of. And I ended up kind of on an order of archivists. I wanted something that had a very something very academic with a little bit of a religious undertone. It is high fantasy, which means that religion often can be interpreted a lot more loosely. And I like the idea of an order maybe, serving a god or serving an entity or something that records history or knowledge, and that they send out these people to basically just record knowledge for them. And I'll do a page on that later, and you're gonna see it. But just keep that in mind, that it's a neutral order that no one really knows what they do. And that's kind of what I went with, at least for now. After kind of figuring out her silhouettes, I went in, and now I'm keeping my pencil a little less loose. I'm focusing a little bit more on construction, but I'm still trying to keep it not too neat. I really just want to get the feel of the character right, and that is such a weird term for something, because there is no right way to get the feel of a character right. It just has to feel right for you. And that is something that I'm a lot better at achieving in sketching than I am at like final pieces. So if you're the same, figure it out then. If you have to draw the character 10,000 times, you know, you're lucky a sketchbook has many pages. But that's just kind of what I settled on. I did try to give her a witch hat, but it really just did not fit the kind of vibe that I wanted her character to have. I like the kind of symmetrical, but still like kind of spiky, not spiky, but like youthful. That is also not the right word, but you get it. I like that kind of appearance, the one that kind of alluded a little bit to her not being, you know, a super stuck-up old librarian. I start off the next page with a lot of a clear idea of who this character actually is. I'm taking all of the elements that I really liked during the ideation stage and kind of fit them together into an initial like portrait for the character. This is not the final version, but it is the version that I'm using to figure out who the character is personality-wise. I've realized over a while, like, of just creating characters, that if I come up with a whole character and their design before I come up with their story, or vice versa, I never end up satisfied with the character or the story, because I feel like they tend to kind of restrict each other. So the way I've kind of started solving this is coming up with a pretty solid idea of what a character looks like, and then figuring out who they are. This gives me still the freedom to change certain aspects, as well as maybe give them details or, you know, props that are important to who they are as a character, without changing major design details. I started off this design just with a fairly loose pencil sketch, and I'm just going over it with ink because I feel like it gives me a bit more of like a mental note of, okay, like this is what we're doing now, right? I'm also just a little bit more careful with my brush this time around, especially paying attention to details that I think make the character unique. In this case, I was initially debating putting a little flower on her side, and while the theme of flowers and nature does eventually kind of get incorporated into her character, it's not in the way that I initially intended for it to do. But I did keep the glasses. I thought the glasses very much add to that kind of librarian look of hers. And of course, like the fawn ears, which is one of the most important character parts of her design. I like the contrast of kind of a very nature-based character living in a very human society. In my world, fawns are super like, they're almost like nymphs. They come from nature, they live in nature, and they tend to kind of keep to themselves. So I kept kind of thinking about the implications this would have for this character, and if she would kind of like yearn for the nature, or if she left it on purpose. So I think contrasts are a very interesting way for your characters to kind of, you know, have their own conflicts. Then I go in with color. I would like to thank Woomer for sending me their watercolors. They reached out to me recently and offered to send me their travel palette to review and just try out. And I was like, you know what, sure, why not? As you guys know, I'm a huge watercolor artist, and I love travel palettes because I like to keep my, you know, workspace quite small, because I don't have that much time to draw right now. So a lot of times I have to go out and take my palettes with me. So this palette is super cute. I love the colors. It's like this purple and mint green, and those are my favorite colors, purple and green. And I was really surprised of how compact this is. It looked bigger online, but I really like how small it is. Like, it literally fits in my pocket. So as I'm talking, you're gonna see me do a bit of swatches in the background, and I'll let you know my kind of thoughts and feelings a little bit later on. But speaking of character contrasts, so when you write a character, you want them to have an internal conflict. Always. And I feel like when I say that, that sounds very dramatic, but it can be very undramatic. In the most literal way possible. Conflict is kind of what drives us as people. Or this like inherent want for more, or the dissatisfaction with something we don't have, or with the way that something is. That's how the world essentially moves forward. So your character's contrast could be very dramatic, like, you know, on balancing duty and honor, or you know, their backgrounds. But it can also just be like, this character really wants to quit their job but also wants to have a lot of money, but their real profession doesn't pay that much. That's a conflict too. It's essentially what gives them a little bit of like interest in moving forward, if that makes sense. So this internal conflict can be scaled with your world at hand, and this really comes back to the idea of world building. You know, world building is not just grand fantasy settings. Yes, in my case it is, because I love high fantasy and I'm a nerd. But if you have characters that are like living in New York or Copenhagen or any other real setting, you still have to world build around that. Which communities are they surrounded by? What is their job? What do they do at their jobs? What do they struggle with? How does the environment impact them? World building has a lot to do with how a character perceives the world around them. And keep that in mind. And really think about, how does the environment affect your character, and how does that lead to contrasts within their theme. I also just want to quickly point out that I am an absolute sticker fiend, and I will... Oh, hi, Butcher. My cat is here. And I will absolutely take any opportunities to put stickers on literally anything, including this case. I like the way this watercolor cat palette came with this like clear plastic case. Something that I kind of struggle with my other watercolor palettes is sometimes, depending on how full my bag is, they open. So I always try to keep them in my pencil case, which takes up a lot of space in my pencil case, but also prevents them from opening. So I really appreciate this, and I think it's a very smart design choice. And I honestly wish more watercolor palettes did this. They also have these little like holders at the back, and I think that this is to like clip it onto your like sketchbook, which is also very smart because once again it gives you more space in your pencil case, and when you're traveling that does make a difference, because I actually try to not take that big of a pencil case. Oh my god, my cat is throwing something down. Butcher! Why am I getting ads on my cat? I'm pro. Anyways, sorry guys. So, oh my god. So yeah, sorry, my cat was climbing my room. But I really appreciate that design choice, and as I said, I wish more palettes had that kind of extra layer of safety, because you can't treat travel palettes the same way you treat normal palettes. Like, putting a lid on is not enough sometimes. I did kind of get a little bit creative, and I put like a keychain on mine, so I can put it actually on my travel bag instead of inside of it, because I don't know, I love the colors and I think it's really cute, so I thought, you know, why not. But yeah, getting back to colors and character, colors can have a very big effect on who your character is, and I don't just mean it as like a, oh, red means angry and blue means calm and yellow means happy. Yes, that is basic like color psychology, and I feel like that comes up in every character design video. And when you're establishing like a very set cast of characters, that can have a really big impact. I mean, my main like 5 characters I feel play into this very well, but it also kind of connects things. For example, uniforms. Think about school uniforms, work uniforms. and how they have color, and how everyone that kind of wears these colors is connected to each other because of the colors they wear. So even if you come into, like, I to this day cannot be wearing like these like knee-length gray skirts because it always reminds me of my school uniform, and I'm like, ooh, okay, now the fit is not that cute anymore. So they can have certain connotations beyond just their happy, sad kind of thing. So consider that, and consider also how color and clothes or accessories work with each other. I really liked the dark blue hair. I thought it was really cute at first, but I wanted it to be a little bit more brown later on, just because I'm like thinking, and I don't think that a fawn coming from a forest would have dark blue hair, unless they maybe, ooh, oh, that's a fun idea, like a Twilight forest. Do you guys remember, I don't know who grew up with Minecraft like YouTubers, but does anyone remember the Twilight forest mod? I've just been thinking like maybe a fawn from there would have like blue hair, but no. I did, however, really, really like the blue. And I ended up using it for the uniform instead. And my witch school's uniform color is this also, basically, it's Payne's Gray, basically. Which, by the way, I'm very happy this palette has, because you guys know that I love Payne's Gray so much, and not a lot of palettes have it, at least with like such a limited amount of colors. But it's my favorite color, one of my favorite colors, at least for watercolor painting. But I liked the idea of her uniform from her like secret organization or regular organization being just a slightly different shade of blue than the actual like witch school's uniform, because I feel like that gives a little bit more like meaning to her character story, which at this point feels a little bit like she and other students are very similar maturity wise. She's maybe like a few years older, but she still has that kind of like childlike innocence and kind of longs for that connection that being in an organization of old strict archivists just does not give her. But her affiliation with that organization is also what alienates her from not just her co-workers but also the students at the school. So that kind of different shade of blue signifies that almost connection, if that makes sense. So I don't know. I don't even know if this is a good thing, but I like the way it sounded, and I feel like it makes the character more interesting for me. So I kind of went with that. I'm also going in with some inks just to kind of figure out her silhouettes and her clothes a little bit more. I try to keep the ink work comprehensible, but I don't necessarily focus on it too much. I like the idea of like a quill. So initially in my head she was a librarian, but I already have librarians. But what about an archivist? I feel like an order of librarians is not all that. An order of archivists, however, like an organization that tries to document all the knowledge that there is in the world and make some sort of sense to it, is a lot more interesting, and also makes a lot more sense for them to kind of send out people and have them record things. And that's kind of where the quill motive came from. I'm also just a big fan of utility belts. So many characters in my world have utility belts. Is it something I just keep coming back to? Maybe. Do I call it a fashion trend in my world for the sake of world building? Yes, I do. However, I can do that because who's gonna police me on it? Also, coming back with the scholar's hat, I just really like that. Like the notion of always continuing to learn is something very cool. I just like that. I love learning things. I also wanted to give her the fawn legs, but I kind of got stuck on them a little bit. I didn't know if I actually wanted her to have the fawn legs or not. Maybe she was like half fawn or something, but to be honest, this is not something I put that much thought into. Oops, wait, what? Who said that? But yeah, I wanted her to initially have a cape, but I liked the idea of almost like feathery wings, but it's just like this overlay cape situation that is part of her uniform. Maybe kind of like to symbolize the quote-unquote freedom knowledge offers, but I don't know, I just thought it was cool. And the thing is, for characters, sometimes you just put stuff in because it's cool. You know what, no one's paying me to do this. I can do whatever I want within means and bounds. But yeah, adding some color. I wanted her actual color palette outside of the uniform to remain somewhat like earthy, to kind of symbolize that kind of nature-y theme. And I think that was the right decision to go. So just because your character went from place A to place B doesn't necessarily always change them fully. And I think it's a good idea for you to kind of think on, you know, how much does this character's origin impact them. I mean, even just think of like real life. Like, some people are from places, and that really, like, that culture really impacts them, versus some people are from places and they're like, you know what, like, that culture doesn't impact me at all. For example, like living in your home country versus living outside of your home country. For me, I'm mixed. I'm Swiss and Chinese Malaysian, which is a very interesting mix, so to say. And that Chinese Malaysian identity always meant a lot to me when I was growing up in Switzerland, because I was the only like non-Swiss looking one there, at least the only like Chinese looking one. Versus now, when I don't live there anymore, my Swiss identity holds a lot more weight to it, because I speak the language, I come from there, I connect with other like German speakers, so it does have an impact. So think about that when you're designing your character. Like, how big of an impact does the environment and their origin have on them, and how do these things kind of play with each other? We're coming back to the theme of contrasts, and that's really all it is. It's the conflict that comes from the contrast within a character and its environment. And that's why I always say world building is so important for characters, because your characters will never just exist in a void. Even if your setting is the literal void, that void will still have world building to it. Because how did they get there? Why is the void? Like, your environment, the people around you, the places you grow up in, even just the nature or air quality impacts who you are as a person. And that is the same for your character. So really take time to figure out the world around them versus just the character, and then you won't have to do a lot of writing. I am objectively not a very good writer. I've never written more than like the short story I had to write in grade 8. That's about as far as it went for me. And I still have like a lot of world building, because once you start putting meaning behind the things you design, even if it's something stupid, like this hat symbolizes the cult of the cats because the character loves the cats, that is already a piece of world building from which you can branch out. So just, you know, I'm not saying think about your design choices in the way of why did I choose it. Think of what purpose do all these things have in the world that I'm creating. Even if your character is based in Glarus or Schaffhausen, it's always a good thing to just, you know, be mindful of why are you doing these things. A lot of times you already know why, you just don't explain it, but just sitting there and like explaining it out loud to yourself, why did you make this decision, can give you ideas of who this character is and why they chose to do that. Or just have a conversation with the character. Ask why do you wear your hair that way? Why do you have so much shit on your belt? All that stuff. It's a good exercise that just kind of gets the mind works rolling, and the human mind is very good at making connections and like seeing patterns, and those patterns can help you establish certain rules in your world order. Now towards the end of it, I have a better idea of who this character is and how their design looks. So I just wanted to kind of do a fuller painting of her, just so I can have a pretty good like visual reference in my sketchbook. I don't think that my sketchbook is doing the Woomer colors too much of a favor. I mean, they look great, it's just the paper is so thin, so I just decided to do one on regular watercolor paper and just cut it out and put it in, because that's a thing you can do. And right about now, I have to say, I really like the paints themselves. I think that the color choice is kind of interesting. I personally don't use that much colors, and I would have really preferred like a brown to a lilac. Not that I don't love the colors in there, it's more about I'm thinking about, you know, taking it with me and traveling. A lot of these colors are very like unconventional, but I also feel like that might have to do with the kind of style I work with. I work with a lot of like earthy tones, so I don't have a lot of use for a lilac, or even just like this specific shade of green, like a forest green, for example, would have been more convenient for me. They are, as it stands, about $19 on their website and on Amazon, and they were very kind as to provide me a 10% discount code for the watercolors on Amazon, as well as their whole product range on their own personal website. So I'll be putting that in the description as well as on the screen. I really like them, and I think for $19 you're getting a good value. I like the thought that was put into the design of them. As said, it addresses the issue of the lack of case that tends to kind of annoy me a bit. So I'm very happy that we're kind of seeing a company address that. I have to say, they are travel watercolors, which means you're not going to get the whole kind of color range, and you have to know how to mix colors when you're using watercolors. I always say that, but you're only gonna get as much as out of your watercolor palette as much as you try. I mean, I can work with very expensive watercolors, and I can also work with like dollar store watercolors, and as long as you kind of learn with the basic, you know, learn how to work with the basic colors, you'll be pretty good to go. But having a decent, you know, color pigment in the first place is very nice when you're traveling, which I enjoyed. I mean, I've taken these out to sketch since getting them, so they work quite well also out and about. My only advice is, if this is your first time getting watercolors, restrict yourself. Learn how to mix with like magenta. Actually, I didn't want to say that. I like the fact that there's a magenta in there, because I prefer mixing with magenta over red. I don't like mixing with red a lot. I think magenta gives you nicer like turnouts, but that also just comes of my background of painting with gouache. But if you're struggling with mixing colors, try mixing with magenta instead of red, because that's gonna get you a lot further, in my opinion. So yeah, learn how to mix colors. But thank you so much, Woomer, for sending those to me. I really enjoyed using them, and I love the little case, and I love the fact that I could cover it in stickers. So yeah, having a solid, somewhat figured out color palette really helps once you're trying to get into the more like lore, quote unquote, details of your character. I always like drawing out my character fully, like having a little bit more of a refined piece like the one I'm doing right now, just because it kind of bridges the gap between quote unquote finishing the design and figuring out your character, like it gives me, it's almost like a fresh breath. Like it gives me time to think while I don't just have to jump into the next part. And that's always why I don't know how to describe it, but that's why I always like finish my design and then I do it again, because I'll always catch things or notice things that I haven't done before. So I just cut that piece out and I stuck it in my sketchbook. And another way to kind of figure out who your character might be is to give them an alternative outfit, especially if your character wears a uniform, because uniforms only, I mean, you can accessorize uniforms. Hell, I did that for years when I had a uniform in school, but uniforms can only tell you so much about a character's affiliations. They don't tell you a lot about the character themselves. So having an alternate outfit or experimenting with different outfits for your character can really help in figuring out who they are as an individual. I didn't have that much time to create alternate outfits, but if this is like one of your main characters, I really recommend doing it. So outfits you could usually do is in uniform, out of uniform. I like doing pajamas. I always think it's very funny to see how people go to sleep, because that's kind of either their least thought about or their most thought about moment when it comes to bed. Like me, for example, in pajamas, like I just go with a shirt and maybe pants. But then I also have like friends that go to sleep like in like a matching set and like a silk bonnet for their hair and like their eye mask and everything. So I feel like it can say a lot about a person, as well as like their social status, or the environment they were raised in. So pajamas are interesting. If your characters are very active, they're like active wear or they're field wear. I have some like characters based in this world that don't go to the school, so they're more like adventure types, so they have like their adventuring fit. So, you know, always worth kind of figuring out. On this next page, I really wanted to figure out a little bit more about the organization that this character belongs to. And that was the Order of the Archivists. I know that I wanted them to have an alias with like something's archivist or something like that, but I still don't have a god of knowledge. So yeah. I really like the idea of like a book and a feather, or a feather and a quill, because it's like you're writing something down in a book and you're recording it, archive it, get it. I need to go to sleep. So I was kind of trying to figure out a little bit of an emblem, because I knew I wanted her to have the insignia somewhere on her piece of clothing, probably on like a little tassel or something, like something that is that almost like an ID. So yeah. Also, another thing is I did not know if I really liked her glasses that much. So as you can see, I'm trying to figure out different kind of like shapes for her glasses. Oh yeah, I'm having a big think. Because I feel like I always default to round glasses, which they're cute, but they don't always fit with every character. And with this character, I don't think they fit that well. And this is something I would have not noticed when designing the character overall. Now, I'm really just designing by sections. I'm tackling like individual parts of the character design, and then kind of not fixing it, but just adjusting it, so to say. Just a quick note, this can be quite of a long process, so if you're on a deadline, I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you have the time to spare, just because like I've had deadlines for character designs before, so, and there you really just focus on the overall composition. And the thing is, like, most of the time you can always just go back and adjust this, even for like comic books. There's this thing that I see a lot of people go through, like, oh yeah, well, I have my character design for a comic, for example. Animation is a little bit different, because a lot of time with animation you work with bigger teams, but with like comics, it's fairly easy to just put in the sketch, because usually you just work either A, by yourself, or with like a very small team, so I'm talking like 3-4 people. And if you're penciling, then congratulations, you can just adjust it. So I'm not saying don't put thought into it, I'm just saying don't over agonize it all the time. But I like doing it when I have time. I mean, this is just a for fun design for now, so yeah. My voice is getting so rough. I feel like every time I get sick, every time I record these, so that's fun. Not concerning at all. But I really wanted to add a little bit of like embellishments to her scholar's hat. I don't actually know what these are called in English, but as said, I'm going on with the feather motif, or like the quill. It's technically a quill, not really a feather motif, just because I think it adds a lot to her character. And what I love about fantasy so much is back in the day, like, people used to not have that many clothes. So they really just have like 2-3 sets of clothes, and then that's it. So if you're like somewhere where there's like nice clothes, you would have like embroidered clothes and everything. So I kind of like experimenting with that. So now we have our characters' design and kind of their personality figured out, but that still does not help us in writing the character, at least not to the level that we want to, right? Personally, that I don't have a lot of trouble writing like a character's personality and sometimes even their backstory. Like, I don't have to always write everything out, it's just bullet points. But where the true like kind of meat of the writing comes in is how a character acts and reacts to the people and the world around them. And that is something I really, really, really struggle with. Like, on levels that I will sit down, I will have writing aids open, everything, and I still can't figure it out. Like, I just stare at the empty page, because in my head I have such a idea of how a character would act, but I cannot translate it into words. So what I started doing is I just, how would this character interact with other characters? Because me personally, if I ever, publish a story, it'll most likely be a comic. So I just skip the writing step and I just immediately go to those like visual interactions. And those don't have to be overly refined, but they have to kind of make sense for you, right? So what I usually do is I fill a spread with a character reacting or interacting with the environment and the characters around them. In this case, it's very character focused. So I was kind of thinking about who would this character interact with on the daily or on the weekly. And those people would definitely be Oswin, who is the head librarian. Definitely students at the school, as she works at the library. Eloise, which is her co-worker, and Shihui, who is also her co-worker. And then also Candle Kitty and the bookworms, which are like critters / parts of the environment within the library. I think showing how a character can react to like animals is also very interesting, especially like I like my bookworms because they can be either really cute or they can also creep someone out, because they're technically, well, they're not bugs, but they have like a worm shape. So someone who's really scared of bugs would probably be kind of scared of them. But yeah, this is kind of the meat of your avoiding writing work. And the cool thing about this is something you can always do. You can always adjust it, but it's, I don't know, I feel like I have so much more control over how I communicate something visually than I have over something through text. There is no tone in text. Everyone interprets text differently, which is a beautiful thing, especially when it comes to reading books, because it makes a literary work so much more meaningful, because it can mean different things to different people. But for me, when I just want to really communicate a certain theme in my character, which in this case it's alienation, I feel like that really helps me in, the visual aspect really helps me in kind of bringing it across very clearly. And no clue why I had such a hard time speaking this out, but yeah, just think about it. One thing I would remember though when I was doing this is body language. We learn a lot about anatomy and composition and storytelling and how how composition and color and line kind of act in storytelling, sometimes even expressions. But the thing is, an expression is really just like how your face looks, kind of. It does not actually tell you that much about what that character is feeling. The thing is, like, I, for example, I'm an expressive person if I want to be, but I feel like when I react, I'm very exaggerated, because otherwise I literally just like dead stare someone in the face. So I'll be like having the best moment of my life and I'll just like have a blank stare. So my expression in that case would not tell you a lot about how I'm feeling, right? Same way that if I wanted to, I could be overjoyed, happy when I'm actually having a very miserable time. And I'm just like smiling and looking great, right? Like, that's not gonna tell you a lot about how a person feels. Body language, however, is a lot harder to fake. So learning about body language and how certain, how a character might even just carry themselves, I feel, has a lot more potential for storytelling than expressions do. Body language can also just tell you a lot about who the character is in general. Does the character sit a lot and is very hunched over? Do they have back problems? Do they walk very, straight up? Do they have a very elegant posture? Do they maybe come from a high society where things such as an elegant posture is appreciated? Do they have a limp? Are they hurt? Do they have maybe a chronic illness that slows them down? Are they missing a limb? Maybe they're missing a limb and their body weight is distributed differently. It's even just starting there, that already has so much potential for storytelling. And I've taken a lot of like courses on character design, and it's not mentioned as much as I would think it is mentioned, when this is actually super important, at least in my opinion. So yeah, does your character freeze up in fear but pretend to still put a smile on their face? Does your character, for example, my dad has this thing. I can always tell when he's stressed, because he'll start drumming his hands on his head, like in like a rhythm like that. So even when he's like, oh no, everything's fine, if he's doing that, that's a telling sign for me that he's stressed. So think about that, like, and that really just comes down to looking at the people around you. You can learn, like, great, I can talk about character design and stuff for hours. I love it, but it's never going to teach anyone as much as just like going out, or even just going into your living room or communal dorm space, or to the grocery store, and just see like, how do people carry themselves, especially if it's people you know, because you already will have a little bit of context and you can kind of connect the lines. Body language teaches you just so much about a character. So when you're drawing character interactions, don't just think about expressions. Think about body language and then expressions. And if you want to, you can also think about how body language and expression play with or against each other. There's so much interesting things you can do with it. And I really wish that courses touched on it more, because I feel like then I would also know more about it. But that's just like my view on it. So try it out, see if that works for you, because it does for me. I'm not good at drawing expressions. But I like doing the body language thing, because I feel like it tells me a lot more about a character. In this case, I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about what I was thinking when I was drawing these characters. So the character's name is Vivian, by the way. I've decided on the name Vivian. I think it's very like nature inspired, but it's not like super stereotypically naturey, and I just thought it fit her. It has a bit of a soft edge to it. So Vivian here is someone that's very duty oriented. She takes her role not just in the order but also as part of the library staff very seriously. But at the same time, and she's treated as an adult. She's treated as a member of staff at the school. But at the same time, she still has that somewhat childlike desire to just, sit with her friends, or, just mess around and be young. And that kind of, at times, contrasts and also isolates her from the people around her, because her co-workers do see her as a bit younger, but still as a member of staff, and at the same time they're also a little bit suspicious of her because she does come from an outside organization. But they still somewhat treat her as an equal, at least in the sense of like business. The students, on the other hand, they think she's quite pleasant. They like talking to her, but she's still a member of staff, so she's not amongst them. So there's always kind of a little bit of a distance between them. So a lot of times during her workday, she'll look yearningly at a group of students, or even just a group of teachers, or a group of like graduates that just are spending time together, and kind of wishes for that same kind of connection. And here I thought composition and character positioning was really interesting. I like the idea of always like one step removed kind of thing. She does not get it very well with Zihui, who is the ex-convict. She thinks his ass should be in jail, and I think their personalities would also just clash. They both have very easily angered personalities. So yeah, surprisingly, she gets along very well with Eloise, who is the candle witch. She's like the one person where she can kind of like let go and be silly around, because Eloise got into that magical accident when she was quite young that turned her into the candle witch. So they kind of share that same feeling of, one step away. I also just, as I was drawing the character interactions, realized how important the order of archivist is for her story part, and also the implications that it might hold for my world. So, as said, branches. This is a great example of, using your characters and your world to kind of jump off of each other and create a sense of a coherent world by world building of each other. I don't write these things down. I have a page about them in my sketchbook maybe, and a few sentences to accompany them, but this kind of organic way of building really helps you kind of remember your stuff better, but it also just makes your world a lot more immersive because the threads feel very natural, right? So if you do like world building, or some of you have asked me like, oh, how do you world build? This is how you world build. It's really just filling in the gaps of what you already made and then going from there. It really, I'm not a big fan of filling gaps separately. Like I don't like this kind of, it's the conversation of gardeners versus architects. I'm a gardener. I let my stuff grow naturally. I go from the small to the big. I have general concepts in my world, like, oh yeah, there's courts of gods. They're not that important. Yes, they created the world, but they're not that important. They're not more important than the characters. No one cares about them that much. They might have a little bit of a role in the story, but what's most important is the characters, and unless I am writing a story about a god, I don't put that much thought into it. I do, however, put thought into the impacts they have on the world, so religion, and how does that affect individual characters or organizations. It's this kind of, you go from a school, and the school has a library, and the library has a staff, right? And then from the staff came a book owl. And then the book owl did this somewhere there, and then the other person of staff did this somewhere there. So that's kind of an example of branching out. That's what I mean. And for me, that's just the easiest way to world build. And I do it all in my sketchbook because, once again, like, do not make me write things down, okay? I barely take notes at school. Yeah. That was just a reminder I have final exams soon. But using this kind of approach is just gonna make it a lot easier for you to remember your things, because everything's gonna be kind of connected in a very organic way. It's kind of like your thoughts jumping to conclusions as you kind of go. So here I was just figuring out kind of the emblem of the archivist. I did want to add a clock because I feel like archival time clock, you know, might be something that could be useful. So I wanted the quill to kind of be like a dial in the clock, so that's like the time, and then I mean you can see it. I don't know why I'm over explaining this, but yeah, I just thought, to be honest, I'm not super happy with it, but it does its job for now. I might go back in later and change/adjust it. I really want to find a course on like creating like emblems or sigils, because I feel like that's something that I really like using in my fantasy worlds. So yeah, but I inked it traditionally with like a dip pen and some black ink. I don't like working with fine liners. I love working with dip pens and glass pens. I think the effect you get with them is so much nicer, and you have so much more control over your line. So if you struggle with inking with fine liners the same way I do, try a dip pen. It's surprisingly a lot more pleasant in my opinion. So that's what I did. I just finished it up there, and you know, sometimes you do want to write things down just so you can remember it. And I don't know if you can read my illegible handwriting, but this is really just pointing out a few things, and it's not worded particularly nice. But and don't look at the grammar, okay, guys? But you know, it does its jobs. I can remember what I was doing. So that's enough. And then from the Order of Archivists, I kind of wanted to branch out again and be like, okay, yeah, well, they have a uniform. Do they have a certain set of equipment? Because they would, right? So I was thinking about props, because props have such an important role when it comes to characters. For example, most of you, including me, probably would have not been found outside without our phones. That is a prop. Your phone is a prop. Your tote bag with 10 million pins and buttons, that is a prop. Your lanyards, that's a prop. So that says a lot about a character, right? So you should put some thought into how it looks and what it does and why you carry it with them. My tote bag with 10 million pins and buttons is an expression of I collect shit and I like to put it on my bag, and it kind of tells a story of all the things that I like. My lanyard for school says I go to the school, and I get yelled at if I don't wear my lanyard. My phone says I like watching Instagram reels every single free time that I have. I also have a scrolling addiction. So think about what your props say about you. You can also, like, I have a portable glass pen in my pencil case. That says I like trying out inks, and I really, really enjoy glass pens. And it's inconvenient, but I still enjoy the art a lot, so I keep it with me. So think about, like, look at your everyday items and think about what that says about you. And then think about what items would your character take with you, and what does it say about them. And especially for organizations, having a certain equipment with them is something very telling about the kind of work that they do. In this case, I settled on a book that has an infinite amount of pages, so you keep filling up the pages and it never runs out. And a pocket watch that tells the time but also doubles as an inkwell, so it keeps filling up with ink, and then once the ink is, like, once you used up all the ink, you like shake it and the dials, they turn, and then you get more ink. Yeah. And then also a quill that where the nib just never wears out. So you can see how I kind of used the three like symbols that I used in the emblem, how I use them as props. So I kind of deconstructed that and went in and created it as props. So think about why you're using certain emblems, and think about, you know, for example, like a lot of like sigils and stuff, like house sigils, they have like animals. Why that animal, beyond the fact that it just looks cool? So really just question your design choices, because a lot of times there is a valid reason behind it, and you can get a lot of cool stuff out of that. Another way to figure out who your character is, as said, their props, their belongings. Show us their bag. And if you ever drew your character's bag and you want to show it to me, Discord link is in the description. I would love to see it. I always think it's very fun. And generally, if you do any of like the kind of spreads that I'm showing you right now, I would love to see them. So feel free to join the Discord. We always like chatting, and sometimes I stream, so all the live notifications are on there too. But yeah, I would love to see them, and I would love to hear about your characters. I always find it very interesting. But here I was kind of figuring out Vivian's bag, and bags say a lot about us. So for example, me, I will not be caught outside with a bag that does not fit my sketchbook. So while I love cute bags, I'm a utility first kind of person, so I have a lot of totes. Versus I have friends, I really like matching their bags to their outfits, like color coordinate them. Whereas I have a friend that has just a bag, and he takes that bag everywhere, and it has like holes and everything, but he takes that bag everywhere, so he's like a utility kind of person. So as said, like, bags say a lot about you, and I think especially in like fantasy, that's very interesting to kind of touch upon, because you can get very creative. So for example, in this case, the bag holds a giant book, so it's like a book strap, but then you can like clip the bag components on there, if that makes sense. And I don't know, I just thought it was really silly, and I thought it was really fun. And I sometimes like to think about how certain garments or bags are constructed. Knowing how things look like and what things look like is going to help you a lot down the path, down the way, down the line. Yeah, English. So, you know, if you're stuck, take time to figure out how things look. You might actually be surprised what comes of it. Also, things like bag support and stuff, it's all important parts of a bag. I like reading these, I forgot the publisher's name. I like reading books on garment construction, not because I'm a particularly good seamstress, but just because I draw a lot of garments. So knowing how they are constructed makes a lot of sense to me. Or like how swords are made and constructed. That makes a lot of sense for me as an artist to know. The great thing about an artist is you can literally read a book on anything and get something out of it. And this curiosity to kind of like learn and want to know what things look like and want to know how things work is something that is very good to have as an artist, and I see a lot of artists have, and you should never lose that, because it's just the more you learn, not just about art, but about the world, about anything. It can be about tractor farming. It's gonna make your art better. It's gonna make it more interesting. You can draw analogies. You can draw parallels. It's always just gonna, even if not, at least you'll be like an interesting person. You'll know cool things at the end of the day. So if you're stuck in art and you find yourself drawing the same things over and over again, read a book, watch a documentary, go outside, go to a museum, talk to someone. This like constant learning is what should drive you as an artist, or at least like a designer. It's gonna help you a lot. Yeah, I like to watch, I think her name's the Octopus Lady. She does like YouTube videos on deep sea creatures and sea creatures, and I love sea creatures and I love learning about them, so highly recommend. Here I'm really just going over the components inside of Vivian's bag. I did want to decorate her archivist's tools a little bit too. I'm someone who likes to put stickers on everything, as you can tell, so I like even in uniforms and standardly issued equipment, I still like giving my characters a certain sense of personality by making it a little bit more unique. Here I was also really thinking about like, what does this character keep with them? Like, what is their like quote unquote secret item? And I think for Vivian it really would be like a locket of pressed flowers from the forest where she grew up in, kind of signifying this yearning for home. I think that's a good way to kind of show the contrast within a character and what they really value and what they really miss. I also just, obviously there's books, but also like a little friendship bracelet. Maybe she got a friendship bracelet from Eloise, who is definitely the kind of person to make a friendship bracelet, and she keeps that a lot. So think about that. So for the last page, I wanted to come back to the concept of the environment and how it affects a character, specifically by kind of drawing her room. A person's living space says a lot about us. For example, my living space, very messy. My brother's living space, full of guitars. Think about your room and what your room says about you. Are you someone who goes outside a lot, so your room is not super decorated? Or are you someone like me who stays holed in her room a lot of time, so there's a lot of stuff in there? Just, are you someone that likes stuff? Is your character someone that likes stuff? Or do they not particularly see any value in earthly possessions? All this can really impact who you are as a person. So drawing out your character's room, or even just sections of their room, can really help you in figuring out how they act, what they value, what they like, and how they kind of conduct themselves, not just in public but also in private. In this case, I did want to kind of figure out the layout of the character's room, as well as capture a few angles and just add a slight wash of color. But in hindsight, that was not very necessary. I think the layout and the way people lay out their room says a lot about what they value and who they are. There's like this whole like feng shui concept behind it. I'm a bad Chinese, so I don't know a lot about feng shui. So yeah. But even just, how do I explain? Like, do they put their laundry away immediately? What do their bed sheets look like? Do they have a hobby? In this case, Vivian's room is full of plants, so she might value those. Just these kinds of like very random things that just you don't think about, but once you think about them, they make a lot of sense. Despite the fact that I always say that I can't draw environments, I really, really love designing rooms and figuring out the layouts of them. And to be honest, I think you would too. Even if you don't like drawing backgrounds and stuff like that, just give it a try. It's very fun and it's very fulfilling because it really just gives you a little bit more time to think about your character and, how they live. And it makes your world so much more immersive, I find. Because now you can kind of picture the environment that they are in. And once I have all that, I really just like drawing my character one more time. Now I know who they are. Now I know who they interact with, how they react to their world. I know how they live. I know what organizations they belong to. I know what they carry in their bag, and I know their values. So I know my characters better now, right? So I want to draw them one more time just so I can come up with a final design and kind of mentally be, okay, I'm done. I finished doing this. This final kind of design is gonna just help you close that chapter on that character and help you kind of just move on and be like, okay, I have that character now. I can now, do my projects with them, or I can move on and create the next character. But those things aren't final. You can always come back. You can always change things. Don't over agonize it. And look, even if at the end of the day you decide to, yeah, I'm still gonna write my character's story and personality and everything down, that too is not permanent either. You can also just who's gonna police you on it? Just go back and change it. It's fine. It's fine. No one's gonna mind. So yeah, at the end of the day, your first target audience is yourself, and you have to be happy with what you create. And that's about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Discord and socials are in the description. Thank you, Woomer, for sending me your beautiful watercolor palette, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!